Hello, I'm the Pink Phantom, and this is my podcast. Join me as I delve into the world of games and gaming, and especially old school RPGs. Together, let's voyage into the astral realm and check out my Phantom Thoughts. In this episode, I've got call-ins from Daniel from the Bandits Keep podcast and media empire, and EOTB from the Classic Adventure Gaming podcast. So let's get to that feedback.
Hey, Pink Phantom, Daniel calling in after listening to the actual play. Really cool. I really, like I think I said it before, I really like the way you do dungeon crawls. I always listen to it when I'm kind of walking the dog, and I can really imagine like the group kind of moving through the dungeon. You know, a couple things I was thinking as you were doing it. The first one is probably not really a thing, but I was just kind of thinking, you know, Gygax in the Dungeon Master's Guide talks about the challenge, right? And how much experience points you get for combats and stuff are based on the challenge that it is. And I wonder, even though your characters are all first level, you know, with all the gear they have, and again, I know you're just saying there was a combat, it happened, whatever, so I don't know how tough they were, but if the combats are basically a breeze, are you considering that in the experience points that you're giving? I mean, I don't think I would, but I'm just curious because I feel like, to me anyways, the way OD&D does it is they just do it strictly by level. So I don't have to worry about whether it was easy or hard, but Gygax kind of seems to, and Jason can call in and correct, or anybody, but I think they seem to imply you got to kind of feel it out, right? It's not necessarily the level, it's how challenging it was. So are these fights like not that challenging mostly, and are you giving full XP for them? And full XP for the treasure that the characters are getting from the creatures in the rooms where the fights happen, because I would consider that part of the thing. Anyways, I was just thinking about that. That's more of a mechanical thing. But in more of a world building, I kind of stumbled my words there, in kind of more of a world building thought, I wonder, because again, spoiler, I guess if somebody was listening to this episode and not the last one, that one PC went down, and I wonder, you know, and of course, the first thing I thought was, they are in contact with high-level clerics and stuff because they used a high-level cleric to remove the curse of the ring, I believe is what happened. And I just remember them being some high-level clerics around. So how available is Raise Dead? Now, and I partially asked this because two things. In my, at the table or in-person group, we've had to use high-level clerics to raise the party members in the past because that's happened, right? And in my solo game, this is kind of a spoiler, but, you know, we're starting to interact with townspeople where clerics are available for spellcasting, because I have definitely, you know, now at this point used them. I don't know if the video definitely will not be out by the time you play this, but so spoiler, somebody got hurt and we used a cleric to help with something. I'll leave it vague. But anyways, I wonder, it does seem to imply in the OD&D and AD&D in my mind, and I'm going to air quote here and say settings, but settings based on the mechanics, that these things should be available. In fact, I'm pretty sure he might even straight up say it in the Gygax 75, or is it Gygax 75 or 74? And possibly even in OD&D, that there should be a town with clerics available to hire out for spells. So are you doing that? Because you have a lot of, I'm assuming, I'm not adding it up, but it seems like they're finding a lot of treasure. So that's also an interesting resource, right? Parties with lots of gold can bring back members. And while I'm sure that a lot of tables, if you're running first level characters, might be like, well, I'll just roll up another one. But again, you've been playing these guys for, God, I feel like, has it been a year? And even though most of them are not on even second level yet, they're still characters that you have a serious stake in the campaign. So I'm sure you don't want them to just go away, right? They're part of the story. What are you looking at as far as if the body can be recovered and raised deads? So be curious about that. Talk to you soon. Hey, Pink Phantom, Daniel fans keep calling in. Sorry I'm driving, so it might not sound as good. But just listen to your latest episode. Really fun. I really like those fighter ideas. I like that they all add a bit of kind of punch, if you will, to the fighter, but none of them seem like they're so over the top that it'd be like, oh no, hold on, that's going to make the fighter just way more powerful than they currently are. It's just giving them that bit of extra. I guess if I was picking a favorite, I like the idea of the extra damage, and because you know now you can damage multiple opponents, right? Or you can be sure to damage the one person in front of you. And then at higher levels, you can do kind of the, I guess for lack of a better word, the cleave, right? I think that's a really good, simple mechanic. Doesn't take a whole lot extra to do, and you're basically done. You're just adding that 2 points of damage at second level, let's say, which I think is really great. So, I mean, there was a lot of good ones. I also really like the weapon versus armor idea. I feel like that's really good if you dig into that, a little bit more crunchy part of it. I mean, all of them, like I say, were good, but those two really stuck out to me as being really great. I had heard somebody talk once before about fighters being proficient with armor and not worrying about encumbrance. I don't know if they were talking about AD&D though, so I think they were talking about more BX. So it was just there was no bulky option. But I kind of like how you did it because it doesn't make it just then every fighter's going to wear the most bulky, heavy armor because they can ignore it. Yours is they still making a decision, right? Do we want to wear chain and then not have any bulk, or I'm assuming chain is fairly bulky, or wear plate and be penalized, a little bit, but not as bad as a normal person. So I really like those options. Very cool. Tales of the Dragon Slayer, I love it. I love the world building that's going on, and the goats. They have the giant goats. I just that's going to be a lot of goat milk, I guess, and goat's cheese, which I like. So I'm down for that. The giant thing, though, like I say, it on some level maybe seemed anticlimactic because the giants didn't fight the orcs, but now the giants are on the side, or potentially will be allies of the orcs against the hobgoblins, which gives them a bit of an edge because hobgoblins are just a little bit more, a little tougher than orcs generally. So those giants might really push the combat in favor of the hobgoblins. I can't remember if the hobgoblins have any other kind of bigger, we'll call them tanks, for lack of a better word, like trolls or anything with them. Anyways, very cool episode as always. I'll talk to you soon.
Hey, Daniel, thanks for the praise for the options for the fighters. Yeah, I was trying not to do anything too overpowered with those, but something to give the fighter a little extra oomph and something that fit the character of the fighter, that kind of gave the fighter that more solid established. This is what the fighter's uh, reason for being in an RPG is, and this is what they're good at, and they should be as good at that as other character classes are at the specialties that they're supposed to have. So I appreciate your feedback on those. As far as clerics that could potential raising dead, yeah, there's clerics there in the way that I picture the world that I've got here, is that there's this fort with this big wall that's guarding this mountain pass, and just behind it, there was a town established to essentially support the fort, because with the recognition that you're going to have supplies, you're going to have support personnel, and you're probably going to have at some point expanding into beyond that section to seek resources there, food, and things like that that'll be closer than bringing them through this long mountain pass. And over time, other things have developed, other settlements have developed, but it's really still a largely undeveloped territory. It's kind of distant from the empire. It's there for the protection of the empire that's beyond the mountains. And so, but there is a large town there, and as a result, to support these settlements and beyond, there would be some, all the different temples or factions or sects, religious sects would have bases within the town that they could support exploration and the different settlements that have gone beyond the wall and things like that. So it would be kind of a central hub and be a larger town, small city, something like that. So there should be adequate clerical resources that if you had to raise dead, you could. Now, the party's been fortunate in that the die rolls have given them a lot of access to wishes to this point they've been able to use. In answer to the other question, talking about XP, I do look at, in terms of the DMG, which suggests fractional XP if, like, the hit dice of creatures that the party is facing is lower than the levels that the party has. I do look at it from that standpoint, and there have been occasions where there have been some of the lower level piercers and where they've just encountered a few like one hit dice creatures in the party. It was a little bigger before because it's kind of split up into some different units at this point. But when it was bigger, there were times when they'd get, probably more than half the XP that would be for that particular encounter, but somewhere between half and full, but it wouldn't be the full XP. As far as deducting it because combat is easier for them or whatever, they are, because of, again, the rolls that have come up on treasure tables. They've got some pretty good armor. They've got some good magical weapons, so they tend to hit better. They don't hit as well as I guess to my mind they should, looking at some of the bonuses they have from ability scores and magical weapons and stuff. It doesn't seem like they hit quite as well as I would think they would. I haven't analyzed the probabilities that much. And they've got some really good armor to the point where most of the party members, when they're up against, a one-hit die creature or something like that, that creature's going to have to roll a 20 to hit them. But overall, they're still almost all first level. Katya has a 4th level in her magic user aspect, and everybody else is still first level. And they rolled well for hit points, and there's some good constitution bonuses, so a lot of them they're in the 9 to 10 hit point range, although there are a couple that are down below that. So they're hard to hit, but when they do get hit, they're going to feel it. And one good blow can take out several of them, and just 2 moderate blows can take out almost all of them. And that's setting aside something like poison, which poor Bernie. he keeps running into poison, but I guess that's part of when you're partly thief. But yeah, I still use full XP as long as the hit dice and levels are at least even. And then, of course, if there's higher hit dice levels, they'll get more. But that's how I handle that. I just adjudicate it by the hit dice, comparing hit dice and levels. So thank you for your questions. Thank you for your comments. So this next section is a series of, a couple of files that EOTB sent me, and there's lots of different topics covered, and so I've tried to split them up and split up my responses. So you're going to hear a lot of back and forth here, but I really appreciate, I know he put in a lot of effort into going through these and responding to going back several episodes, and I really appreciate the effort he put into that. So thank you for the call, and here we go with the calls and my responses. And I will just add, in a couple of these responses, listening back to them, you're going to probably hear me sort of muddle off on my own pathway, talking about things that maybe he didn't talk about, or in a couple of cases, I actually circle back around and agree on something that he said, without mentioning that he was the one that said it. But that's just the squirrel in my brain running around and around. So take that for what you will.
Hey, Pink Fandom, this is EOTB. I've been catching up on several of your episodes. It's been a real busy February, but I just thought I'd call in with a few comments on them. These are going back like 4 episodes or so, some of them. But on one of them, you were talking about experience points and milestone awards, experience for gold. This was Muster talking. And the conversation, this is one of those topics that's been going around in role-playing games since the beginning. But I am definitely on the side of gold for XP, and I personally have a great distaste for milestone leveling. In terms of what makes it work, I know that there was, like a mention from Jason about reworking the XP tables. I think that the pace of play in gaming has been lost. There's one point in the early Dragon magazines where Gygax is frustrated because he's talking about, D&D's been out for 2 years and people are coming to conventions and they have all these characters that are 45th level and they've killed Thor and they're asking me what I'm supposed to do now. And that was when he was talking about like people need to slow the game down, he was talking about that's his framework. He's talking about those guys. They've been doing it for 2 years and they've supposedly done everything, and this game is a giveaway. Regular dungeon masters heard that and they basically started skimping the game down because they applied that to themselves instead of the frame that Gygax was talking about. But as part of that conversation, one of the key bits that he put in there was his expected pacing. And he said that in his campaign, what was normal was for characters to go from beginning to name level in a year of play. So figure 52 sessions of 4 hours. And however people play now, like if it's 2-hour sessions or if it's every 2 weeks or whatever you do, figure 52 sessions, 4 hours per session. That should be roughly about how long it takes you to go to name level. And a lot of people are not playing anywhere near that pace, and I think there's a ton of reasons for that. But the treasure that's being handed out, like that's your rule of thumb. That's how you should be supporting that. Now, one other item on there that you were talking about, you were talking about how to get treasure from, or how to get XP from magic items. And in 1E, you do get XP if you don't sell them. There's an experience point value and there's a gold piece sale value. So if you have a sword that has a 500 XP value and a 2,000 gold piece value, you get the 500 XP if you keep the sword. However, if you immediately sell the sword, instead of that 500 XP, you get 2,000 gold pieces and you get 2,000 experience points for the 2,000 gold pieces. So you can get more XP by selling the items that you find that you don't really need. So that's another way that people jump up in the XP levels. It's one of the reasons why there's the rules in D&D that, or in AD&D, that really only apply at the early levels. That hey, you could hit a cap on XP from a single adventure, and then the other experience points slough off because like if you find a ring of protection +1 on your first adventure, you could theoretically sell that for 10,000 gold pieces / experience points. And just shoot from level 1 to level 4 if you're a magic user or something like that. So that's just one thing to be aware of. It's very easy to get magical experience points from all sorts of, or it's very easy to get experience points from all sorts of treasure. And you don't actually have to sell the valuables. You just have to get them back to your stronghold. So if you found a valuable, tapestry, a statue, I don't know. Whatever treasure it is that has value, if you want to take it back and decorate your stronghold for it, you get the gold piece value for that as XP. You don't have to sell the gems. You don't have to do any of that. You can just keep anything that is worth money and get the experience points for it. So it's actually not as hard to rack up the XP as you think. So one of the thing was, in terms of getting levels, I think that maybe it was Jason also who was talking about this in terms of how to get up there. One of the things I recommend is that for people who are not intimately familiar with how a game system works from beginning to end, is that you always play an increasing level of character, because it should be corresponding to your level of experience in the system. So, for example, it's very easy for me when I'm running games at conventions that are high-level games to pick out the players who signed up because they wanted, to feel what high-level play tasted like, because they don't know what to do with their characters. So ramping players up through levels, this gets back to what Gygax was talking about and why he wrote Tomb of Horrors. You say you have a 45th level character, and yet your player experience is obviously not that high, so it's not, I guess, legitimate to use a bit of the muster terms. So how do you get the player experience? Well, don't knock everybody back to level 1 all the time. Especially when you're learning the game, if somebody dies at level 5, let them roll up their next character at level 5. Whatever it is. The point is to get the experience level of the player up to where they know how to work the system. Because like I was talking about with those high-level characters and inexperienced players, they don't know how to use them. The characters are way less effective in the hands of new players than they would be in, the guys that are also at the same table who've been playing at cons with me for years and years and intimately know how to use all of those high level abilities together in combos and little permutations that aren't obvious, that jump off the page of the character sheet when you're scanning it real quick before you play. So by just letting players get the experience at all stages of the game until they are conversant with the system in its entirety is really the best way to go. And last, in terms of the gold for XP, another thing that I would just like to say that what I really like about it is that it makes the game so honest, or transparent, for lack of a better word, maybe. But what I mean is that there's no disparity between, like character heroism and player mercenaryism. Right? This is one of the things that always kind of cracks me up, is that players want their characters to be heroic, but then if they don't get XP for it, then if they don't get an actual objective game reward for it, then they're not happy. It's an interesting dichotomy. I've always thought, like, look, man, it's so cool to do heroic stuff in game, and the rewards that you get out of it are completely soft, right? Like you might get, better reactions, or you might get some help along in a future time, but that's the whole point. It's heroic, so that's what inspires the other characters in the world, is that your character did this without reward. The player doesn't need a reward. The character doesn't necessarily need to go up in level. The point is to play fun adventures. It's not to level characters. Characters do level, of course, because that's just nature of gaming, and it opens up new experiences. But as soon as you make leveling a character the objective of the game, something is lost. So I like gold for XP because it's absolutely clear, it's absolutely transparent. Every character needs it, right? I mean, like, if you're a paladin or a monk, you tithe all of this stuff up anyway. It's not like good characters wouldn't want to get all of that cash. And then as a DM, you just let the players see, like, oh yeah, all this money that you tithe. Well, depending upon what your paladin's religion is. I mean, maybe like it strengthened some border fortress, and so it solidified the forces of good out in the wilderness, or maybe it relieved some suffering in the city or something. So even there, the heroism and the altruism is still supported by getting gold for XP. And by goodness, DMs, hand out more treasure. Be willing to find the Monty Hall level before you begin dialing it back, and don't start dialing it back before. That's my advice on gold for treasure. So, there was also comments about transition, like what do you do when you transition up to higher level? And again, thinking back on wargaming and this muster, so put yourself in the frame of the original people, right? They did the high level, they did the name level activities in the game before D&D existed. D&D was grafting in all of this adventuring stuff in front of and before high level play. Like, instead of just being Napoleon, you could be Conan the King, but before you could be Conan the King, you had to be Conan the Thief. You had to be Conan the Mercenary. So you didn't just get to be Conan the King. But when you did, it was a transition back to the play that you already knew. It was then, okay, now I'm sort of taking less of this unfamiliar new gameplay, and I'm folding back in more of the gameplay that I'm used to. And now that's completely flipped. It's completely opposite. People are absolutely used to the idea of adventuring. They're used to Conan the Thief. They're used to Conan the Mercenary. They're not used to Conan the King. It's not been their experience. So it's just an interesting mirror image of the early days of the hobby, where I don't think that they had any problems with high-level play, because it was just going back to the style of campaign that they did before D&D was invented.
The reason why I guess I talked more about gold for XP than anything else, and yeah, you can get XP just for possessing magic items, and you can get XP for killing monsters in AD&D. But I mean, and I know you know this. I'm just saying that to go kind of down my train of thought here. But the reason I was talking about gold for XP is I often see or hear or read gold for XP as the only standard, the elite standard, the top standard, and sometimes it's expressed in a way that that's the only way you award XP. And I think that's very limiting. I know people say it's the most freeing, it gives players the most freedom and the most context, and I just don't see it that way. I see if you're putting it as you're going to get all your XP or predominantly get your XP from gold, then you are putting a very mercenary cast on a campaign. And if you have a lot of other things going on in the campaign, and those are the things the players latch on to that are not mercenary, that are not immediately going to put gold in their pockets or lead them to dungeons full of treasure or what have you, then you are limiting the ability of the players to advance because they're not viewing with everything through that lens of, but will this bring me gold? To me, that's a limit to the playstyle of strictly gold for XP. Now, I think it was Jason that said what I was talking about was milestone XP. I didn't particularly bring up that particular, uh, description, but I was describing what I was trying to talk about was XP for achieving essentially goals the players set for themselves. That they have things they want to achieve, but those may not necessarily lead to a lot of gold, but they're in the game world, they're executing in the game world, they're performing as their players, as their player characters, and they're chasing the plot hooks they want to chase, which is something that gold for XP is supposed to help you do. It's supposed to make it easier to do a sandbox. But I think sandbox is just as easy if you just assign things an XP value. I mean, if you say, because I've heard the argument I've heard is, well, you can always give it a gold value. Well, you can always just give it an XP value. I mean, that argument works both ways. You can say, okay, I'll assign it a gold value, and then we'll say that gold XP is equal to the gold you earn. But you could have just assigned an XP value to it, and it would have been the same XP wise. And the only question is, treasure for the sake of players economically. Things like upkeep or buying items they need to buy, outfitting themselves for expeditions, things like that. You need gold for that. But does it always have to be tied directly to XP? You can just as easily arbitrarily assign an XP value to accomplishing something as you can arbitrarily assign a gold reward to doing something, because it's going to be the same number. It's going to be the same number. You get 2,000 gold for doing this. You can just easily say you get 2,000 XP for doing this, and you also pick up 500 gold in the process. That would address some of the things I've seen about campaigns where people have just treasure coming out of their ears and don't know what to do with it. Admittedly, a lot of that is some of the newer school stuff, I guess, where they don't have things like upkeep and domain play and training to level and things like that are treasure drains on older school styles of play. I think that the information you gave about what Gary said about how fast you should level, that's some very interesting stuff. And it's always that's always a discussion, right? How fast should people be able to level? And is there leveling too fast, leveling not fast enough? Obviously, you don't want to get to the point where you level to a point where you don't know what to do in the campaign anymore. But then again, maybe that's just signaled in that campaign and do something else. And I think you look at some of the newer OSR style rule sets. A lot of them don't go that high in terms of level, so there's sort of a limit there, unless you want to build on that yourself. And again, we'll get into the discussion of high level play. what should high level play look like. Of course, for people who've been playing for a long time and play the very old rule sets, you're going into domain play, but I'm not sure how many people want that. How many people outside of a wargaming mindset, a wargaming context, a wargaming background want to have domain play, because that tends to be what it leads into. You have your own shrine, you have your own temple, you have your own guild, you have your own fortress with an army at your disposal. That naturally leads into more into wargaming and kingdom building and things like that. And some people just aren't interested in that. So in those circumstances, it might be better if those folks are more interested in the dungeon delve or things of that nature to slow down the progression so that you're not getting to those ultra high levels where, especially again in the old games, where domain play is kind of built in and assumed that that's going to be the next phase, that's going to be the next step. But then on the flip side of that, you have situations where if you're playing through something like an adventure path, you need to progress to get along that adventure path. So there's sort of a timer on it. Or maybe it's a situation where you can only meet to play once a month. And so if you don't progress more quickly than, say, Gary said you should, and he's coming from a context of when he played in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and was probably playing all the time, but where you have a group that gets together once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks, once every month, and if they want to have that sense of accomplishment, maybe they need to progress faster. But it's always interesting to hear what, from the foundations of the game, from the beginnings of RPGs, what people were doing. But there's also the context of how were they doing it? Were they playing every week? Were they playing multiple times a week? Were they playing, was it the open table concept they were using where people came and went as often as they could and as often as they wanted to, as often as they could? And so they had multiple characters, and so some progressed faster than others. So there's a lot that goes into that, and it's something that's I always like hearing about. So I appreciate you adding in what you have gleaned in your journey through this RPG hobby.
So, a couple of other comments from some of those early episodes. I noticed on the slow spell that you cast that you gave him a saving throw. I didn't know if you were using the 2E version or not, or if you had just kind of house ruled in a save for slow. And if you have, ignore this comment. But slow doesn't have a save. And one other thing I noticed is that is the creatures who are slowed in the round that they can attack, they still automatically go last. If you weren't familiar with that, check out it's in the player's handbook. Actually, I think it's in the combat section. It has something like who goes first or something like that. It's like a paragraph. The combat section of the player's handbook isn't extensive. It's very general, but it does have combat rules in there that are not present anywhere in the DMG. But it establishes that if you're slowed, you always go last. If you're hasted, you always go first, compared to any character who is not slowed or hasted. If multiple people were running at the same metabolic speed, then you'd probably have to roll an initiative between them. But
I know exactly what happened with the slow spell because I know how my brain works. The slow spell on the page is split. The first part, which is mainly the stat block with range and like that, and whether or not it gets a saving throw, was on the bottom of the right-hand column, and the description was largely in the top of the left-hand column. And when I was going through the combat, I had the page up, but I had it at the top of that left-hand column. It was a PDF on my computer, and I had it up. And so, even though I know the stat block for the spells comes before the description, I was looking at the stat block of the spell immediately below it, which did have a saving throw. So that's why I gave a saving throw for the slow spell, even though it doesn't get one. And fun fact I know EOTB, you probably know this, but for others out there, slow spells in AD&D stack. So if you cast a slow spell on a group of creatures, and then you cast another slow spell on the group of creatures, or another magic user does that, you've got like extra slow. So so they stack. So you could have a situation where you could have, if you had a lot of magic users with slow spells, you could have, multiple levels of slow going on in a combat. So that's pretty interesting. But that's what happened with the slow spell. It was just me misreading what I was reading in the book. It was not a conscious choice to give a saving throw where there was none.
And on the lycanthrope as monster debate, I couldn't point you to a citation on this. I mean, I could say that back in the day, I mean, in the 10 years that 1E was going, I mean, it was pretty well established that monsters were monsters. And a good rule of thumb for that is, what attack matrix do they attack on? Like, there's no point that werewolves, whether they're wearing human form or whether they're wearing wolf form or whether they're wearing hybrid form, they don't attack as a 4+1 or 4+3, I can't remember offhand, monster on the monster attack chart. They're always monsters. They always need hold monster, not hold person, regardless of whether they are, what form they're in. So now, I mean, can DMs play around with that and say otherwise? Sure. But if you're curious on what the intent is on that, it's definitely monster. You're talking about the rules. Like they only get experience points when they're functioning as a human or whatever, and not as a monster. Keep in mind, like, read the first paragraph of that section. So this is a very Gygaxian thing. He notices a problem or an unintended outcome, and that's that players catch on that, hey, lycanthropy has some good advantages. I'm immune to anything but non-magical weapons, and I'm immune to anything but magical weapons, etc., etc. So maybe I won't really try super hard to get cured. And so he launches into a bunch of rules in that section that are specifically designed to go after the power-mongering player mindset, to where it is no longer better for them as a power-mongering player to choose to go lycanthropy, and he sticks all these rules in. Those are not meant to go out into the wider world. Like, you don't have rules for werewolves with levels in the monster manual. I'm not saying that there couldn't be some, and I'm not saying that there may very well have been, some support material somewhere that had a 10th level fighter who became a werewolf or something like that. But as a general rule, there are many parts of D&D or AD&D specifically, that being what I'm most familiar with, where Gygax will throw rules out for players that do not reach back into setting a precedent in the game world for how non-player entities of that sort work. It's like dwarven clerics. Are they in the world? Yes. Can players be them? No. That's just another example. So if you wanted to make human the human aspect of werewolves act like humans, sure. I'm not here to criticize the concept, but I would definitely say that it was not intended to be that way, and so it would be a DM deciding to do something different.
Now that's one of those things I wouldn't have known if you hadn't told me. That falls into that category, and that's a pretty interesting concept. I can see that now that you say it, those rules developing as part of the arms race, because it does seem like, from other things I've heard about what Gary has said and what Gary has done over the years, that he is pretty intent on that player GM sort of arms race of the players figure out a way to manipulate the system in their favor, and so the GM adjusts the system so that is negated or lessened or changed, or there's suddenly where there was only upside, there's now a downside, that kind of thing. That's that push pull of developing a system of rules over the course of a campaign and within a group, and how that's adjudicated. And it goes back to when people read some of the things that Gary writes in the AD&D DMG, and they start talking about adversarial GMing, or how Gary didn't like magic users, or things like that. And but it's a group of friends, essentially or at least a group of co-players, playing together, knowing each other, developing a style of play, and developing that balance because you don't want the game to be too easy, but you don't want it to be too hard where people just give up and quit because they have better things to do with their time. But you don't want it to be too easy because you want that challenge. You want that overcoming obstacles and things like that. So I really appreciate you bringing that knowledge to the podcast. Thank you very much.
One other thing, hills and forests. I think there was some point in there where you're like, well, this is forested hills, so which one does it go through? And I think you averaged it. Another general principle from the Gygax games is that if two modifiers apply, you take either the worst one or the least one, depending upon the context. And in this case, with terrain, you would take the worst one. Like, the forest doesn't become easier to go through because it's hilly. Why a forest, would make it easier to get away applies whether or not there's hills in it or not. So it wouldn't average. It would just be the forest modifier. And I have some other thoughts, but I will do a separate call-in for those.
That is a very good rule of thumb. I'm going to apply that in the future. Thank you very much for that.
Hey, Phantom, this is EOTB again on the next call on the last few episodes. I forgot one thing I'll throw in on some of those, that lycanthropy fight episode, which was a very cool fight, by the way. I mean, it was an interesting fight. For Charm Monster, one of the rules of thumb that I use, and this is based on Gygax's commentary on Charm Monster and the DMG, is that it doesn't change their base alignment. They only change their view of the caster, not any of his associates. And communication is key. Now, with a werewolf, communication isn't going to be a problem. But would a werewolf be concerned that the person that was his new friend was becoming a lycanthrope? Probably not. Probably he would think that was actually the best thing for that person. He would definitely fight his former buddies. He would definitely fight the other werewolves. They're chaotic evil. I mean, they probably fight all the time anyway, in terms of pack dominance or whatever. But I don't know that he would be all that concerned about the change to lycanthrope, or wanting to give him a warning that it was going to happen or anything like that. But that's just my take on that.
So the way it played out in my mind with the charmed werewolf is not so much that the werewolf intentionally was letting Nantor know that he was a werewolf, but just that once they got back to town, that Nantor kind of, it's still a werewolf even though it's charmed, kind of locked it up, and then later discovered that the werewolf had reverted to its human form. And I know, reading into it a little more, that werewolves that have been werewolves for a while can control the transformation more. To me, it just was like the werewolf will be charmed. It would consider this Nantor a friend, and so it wouldn't think twice about when sort of the natural feel of, it's morning, I'm going to transform unless I stop it. It wouldn't have any reason to stop. So that's how Nantor discovered it was a werewolf. It was a wolf, and then suddenly it was a person, and so he put two and two together, and not so much the wolf intentionally letting Nantor know. That's the way I saw that in my mind anyway.
On the muster playing to win part, so now this is interesting. This also ties into the very last, I think the last call-in episode where people were talking about competition. There was a couple of episodes where people were calling in about competition. So I would put it as there's like a false dichotomy. There's cooperative games, and then people look at competition and are like, well, but there's not one winner, and the DM's not out to get you, so it's not really competitive either. I would go back to, I think that the wargaming aspect that the author of Muster is talking about is actually kind of key here, and I would tie this into what I call map painting games, right? Where like I think Paradox games are the ones that I'm most familiar with, where you take a nation at some point in history, and the game goes for like 500 years, and you're trying to essentially run that nation. You know, you go through various rulers, they're born and they die and they succeed each other. But essentially you have a nation and you are fighting against the other nations around you and basically reliving the historical experiences of that nation that always branches off into alt history, of course. But it's roughly similar to, you know, taking the nation of Venice in, you know, 1204 and then running it for the next 400 years. So we've gotten very used to the idea of artificial intelligence, and you have a developer, right, of the game, and they're plugging in rules and mechanics to help to give you, as playing Venice or whatever nation, the chance to succeed. Like, you have ways that you can increase your abilities and capabilities and powers, similar to a character leveling. And they also make those same rules available to every country in the game that you're not playing, or maybe slightly different rules that only apply to those other countries in the game. And then they program in an AI. And the AI is not your friend. The developer doesn't want you to always lose, right? Because then you're not going to buy the game, you're not going to play. But the AI that they program is absolutely disinterested in whether you win or lose, even though the developer is. The AI isn't helping you. I mean, there might be AI countries that ally with you because they see that it would be in their interests. But there's generally no altruistic part of the AI of a map painting game that's there to help you out. And the interesting thing is those artificial intelligences were essentially trying to emulate the organic intelligence that was seen in wargaming, and that was intended to be carried forward in D&D, which is, I think, what he's trying to capture there. What he's saying is you need to be an OI. You know, you develop a world, your players develop characters, you want to see them win, but they are absolutely competing against your OI ran NPCs and locations and scenarios and monsters and everything else in the same way that when I sit down and play Venice, I am competing against all of the nations in that area that are ran by the AI. Does that mean the developer doesn't want to see me win? No. Does that mean the DM doesn't want to see me win? No. Absolutely the DM wants to see you win. But whether you win or not is absolutely up to you. And if you don't execute in the way that is necessary for you to quote unquote win, and when I say win, I'm using that as a shorthand for achieving your goals for in that campaign, which almost inevitably include becoming more powerful, becoming wealthier, going and seeing stuff, you know, making your mark in the world, moving up to become a baller in that world, then the world will make you lose. You'll die. You know, or your character will get imprisoned or whatever. I mean, or it'll be taken out to NPC status because it became undead or something like that. But whatever you were trying to do won't happen. And you will have to start over with a new character. So that's definitely not cooperative. It may not be competitive if someone limits competitiveness to thinking about there is a winner and a loser. Well, in this case, the winner would be the organic intelligence. The winner would be the OI. The winner would be the design of the world. The antagonists, the artificial antagonists in the world that your OI DM is running to the best of their capabilities, their true capabilities. You know, dumb people are played dumbly, greedy people are played greedily, but they're played true to artificial life, and they're played to the best of what that character is capable of against you, even if it completely wrecks whatever you wanted to do with your character. That's completely different from cooperative games. And maybe it isn't purely competitive in every sense of the word competitive. But if it's not cooperative and it's not competitive, then what is it? Because I think that as long as it's not considered cooperative and it's distinctly differentiated from competitive, I think people are okay. But I think we get hung up on the word cooperative.
My view on this ultimately is that the GM provides challenges, but there's a difference between putting a challenge in front of someone and having a competition. Because if to me competition is your desire is based on the desire of the participants. If your desire is for the other participant to fail so that you can succeed, that's competition. Whereas if your desire is to put forth a challenge to the other party and watch how they succeed and hope they succeed, and if they fail, then they fail. You're not gonna, push them over the top to help them succeed, but just to put the challenge in front of them and see how they confront is not the word I want, but how they confront it, how they uh, adjust to it, how they overcome it or attempt to overcome it. That's to me, that's the difference. It's a competition when you have two sides interested in defeating the other, and that does fall, quickly into a wargaming aspect. Because in a war game, especially a moderated war game where there's a referee, the referee is not providing any of the challenge at all. The referee is simply adjudicating the actions of the parties involved in the war game. But each side of that war game is trying to defeat the other and keep them from achieving their goals while achieving their own. So that's to me, that's the crux of the whole thing here. It's a competition when there's an intention to defeat someone, when there's an intention to seize a prize where only one party can have the prize. That's competition, and anything else is just a matter of placing challenges and playing out challenges. That's the way I look at it. This last section from EOTB, he touches on several different things. I found them very interesting, so I'm including them here. I didn't really have any kind of counterpoint or response to it. I was just fascinated listening to what he had to say, and I thought it touched on a lot of things that I think a lot of us can empathize with, can relate to, and so I just wanted to include them here. And thank you again, EOTB, for all the comments that he sent me.
Character death. This is just me. I know that there's tons of people who identify with their characters. I never really have. And part of that is probably becoming a DM almost immediately. And the one player session that I was in where I was playing when I was first learning the game, we're all molded, I think, by our formative first experiences. So I rolled up a magic user, brand new campaign. This DM was going to do a new campaign. It was a new DM too, fairly new. I mean, he wasn't brand new, but he wasn't like he'd been doing it for years. And we rolled up our characters. I rolled up a magic user, and he did social class stuff. So I rolled really high in the social class, and I was like a noble. So I'm a noble magic user. And then he goes off. We rolled up our characters, and he goes off for like a month, and he makes up this campaign. And we're all jazzed. Never played it before. I can't wait to play my noble magic user, first level magic user. And on the very first night, that noble magic user got nuked. I think we were fighting goblins or something, and there was just a series of bad rolls, and they got to me on the back line, and I got taken out. And I can still remember like the look on the DM's face. Nobody would have ever thought of fudging, but he was like, crap, I made that noble magic user's father like the center part of the campaign. And like, that's all gone now. And it was like, whoa, what do we do now? And he ended up making an entirely new campaign that we didn't end up getting to play because he moved away shortly after that. But and I took over DMing. So from that point forward, I always had 50 characters. And I guess that because that first character had died right away, I didn't really identify much with any particular one. But I look at characters like fish, and other people look at characters like, like dogs, I guess, or something. But when you've played through the game for so long, and there's no character class that you haven't, quote unquote, played up to every level, you've played them all, the characters just start not mattering in comparison to the experience around the table with the guys. I mean, that's what or the guys and the girls. I mean, that's what I'm there for. I'm there to make connections with the people, whether online or in person. I'm trying to draw reactions and excitement out of them personally, and I just don't really care about the characters because we're going to go through characters like Boots. So, and like I said, I totally get why other people are the other way, but I can definitely understand why a lot of people really aren't concerned about character death. Like if one dies, well, he could have been a contender. Well, but maybe the next one will get the ring instead of this one. So, but it being competitive like that, he's talking about, you need to be sportsmanship. You need to have sportsmanship. And I think with the sportsmanship, like what he's talking about there, gets back to what I was talking about with, your friends around the table. Like it needs to feel fair. Like even if I'm playing a character, an NPC that's definitely going after one of the player characters, like they know I'm not. And you do need to be sensitive to people around you. You need to make sure that you're not pressing their buttons. For me personally, me and my friends, we belittle each other all the time. I mean, we're constantly cracking on each other. It's like it's how we tell each other we value each other, because you only crack on your friends. Like there's the sense of it. And I think that's also just how competitive people are in general. I'm very competitive. So are all of my friends. So how do we do a social game? Well, the way you take the edge off the competition is kind of through that constant like cracking on each other. It's a signal to our friends that it's friendly. And we do know when to pull back on it. Like we understand when we're with people who aren't competitive and who don't have that sense of how to manage that competitiveness in a social setting, that they wouldn't take it that way. But that's where I think that sportsmanship comes in. It is important. And at the same time, it can be very tough to integrate two different personality styles across the table, I think. Because there's just some personalities that aren't compatible with each other, and neither of them are wrong. They just don't work in a team type situation. I think we've all experienced that in non-D&D teams as well. So, I mean, sometimes if you're working together, you have to make it work. But if it's a volunteer type basis, you just tend to kind of coalesce into teams of people that gel personality wise. So, great shows. Enjoyed them. Hope these comments aren't too late. If they are, then you can just ignore them and consider them personal feedback. But if they work for you, go ahead and slap them up on your next show. And thanks for doing the episodes, and you have a good night.
The opening music of this podcast is Strength of the Titans, and the closing music is Late Night Radio, both by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. Thank you for listening to Phantom Thoughts. I would love to hear your feedback. You don't have to be part of the show. If you want to contact me and let me know, hey, these are for your eyes only. I just wanted to give you thoughts, ideas, response, and it's really for your eyes or ears only. That's absolutely fine. I'd love to hear from you either way. So just let me know when you contact me. Just, I don't want to be part of the show. There are lots of different ways you can contact me. You can send me an email at phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com. And that can be a regular email, or you can attach an audio file to it. You can use the message button on my podcast site on podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/phantom thoughts. You can contact me via my Google Voice number, 864-209-1441. You can contact me via SpeakPipe at www.speakpipe.com/Phantom Thoughts. You can contact me on Discord, The Pink Phantom. All this contact information is listed in the show notes of every episode. And thank you for those who call in. Thank you for those who don't call in. I appreciate you listening and hope you'll listen again next time. Until then, I hope you have a great day.